Okay, so this is Henry Chamberlain. I'm a cartoonist and writer, and I have with me Steve Duin and Shannon Wheeler, and we're going to be talking about the Mueller Report graphic novel. These two gentlemen are uh, both quite distinguished. Steve is a journalist. He's been with the Oregonian for many years as a columnist, among other things, and Shannon Wheeler, I haven't had all my coffee yet. He is well known as the Too Much Coffee guy. That was his comic strip, Too Much Coffee Man. He's a cartoonist with the New Yorker, and both of these guys worked on Oil and Water, which was a graphic novel about the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So I'll let you guys jump in and do another little introduction about yourselves. Maybe we can start with how this idea just came about from either of your perspectives. We can start with Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Henry. It's great talking to you. And by the way, the last name, oddly enough, is pronounced Dean. It is spelled D-U-I-N, but it's a weird Dutch-German mix. Shannon and I have known one another really well for a dozen years. Again, we went to Louisiana for about a week when in the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon to work on that graphic novel together. We found we could actually had a pretty good chemistry, oddly enough, and odd because we're both stubborn and irascible and all that kind of crap. But last August, Shannon called me up and said, we got to do a graphic novel on the Mueller Report. And I began the project thinking that Shannon and I could pull this off in about 6 weeks and needed to pull this off in about 6 weeks. As it turned out, it took about 11 months for us to dive to the bottom of the well. But again, I think we work well together, and I hope what we've produced in this graphic novel is a much more accessible document if you want to understand why Mueller spent 2 years of his life investigating this.
Please, Shannon.
Yeah, that's pretty much hits the nail on the head. It was Justin at IDW that called me up and asked if I was interested in doing a graphic novel on the Mueller Report, and I knew that I would be in over my head doing it, and that's why I wanted to pull Steve in, mostly so we could do a good job and then do it quickly. We didn't do it quickly, but I hope we did a good job. I think we did. It's been rereading it again. I'm like, hey, we hit the marks on this. So today I feel good about it.
I know how you feel. You just have those misgivings, and then later in the day, wait, I'm okay.
Dynamics kicked in, and things get that sunnier.
I was doing some extra research. What other angle could I cover? And I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent because there's good news to this. First I thought, is this bad news? Because there was another Mueller Report graphic novel by Barbara Slate. And so I checked in with her, and she said, oh, I love these guys. Shannon actually supported my Kickstarter. And so, hey, she just says hi. And so I thought, well, that's wonderful. We can live in a world with two Mueller Report graphic novels.
Yeah. I very much feel like we're trying to understand something and understand history, and really the more angles that we attack it from, the better off we are. And so the more the merrier, really. Yeah,
I think there's room for 5 or more graphic novels just on this, or offshoots, because there's so much. And you have to figure out, what am I going to focus on? How am I going to frame this? What am I going to drill down? There's so much, but you guys managed to create a very compelling narrative with Robert Mueller as the narrator, which is interesting because, as it was kind of common knowledge, although at the same time, everything's not black and white, but the consensus is that Mueller did a lackluster job when he testified, which is it can be slanted different ways. I think he was himself, and he was not going to be partisan and so on. But so I think for you guys to go in there and give him his due, allow him being the narrator. Can you speak to that maybe?
My respect for him, as I read the Mueller report the first time, just went up with each chapter, really. And so I think he has a lot of integrity, and I continue to be impressed by him.
And Henry, he was an unmitigated disaster before Congress. I mean, that was painful to watch, and you could tell he didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
You could tell he did not believe that was his role, to try to go somewhere beyond where the report went. I think we found, going the farther we dove into the report, we found he followed some pretty tortured roads to sort of the end of the, to the dead end sign. We didn't feel like we needed to do that. He was obligated to do that in the course of his investigation. If anything, I think what we tried to do was pull back on a couple cases where, yeah, there was glorious array of detail about how the Russians, for example, were trying to reach out to the Trump campaign, not really knowing any of them. The weird connections that were made in the Seychelles, for God's sakes, the strange people that were brought in. At some point, though, we wanted to sort of, again, pull back a little bit from that and sort of focus on some of the main characters that Mueller dove into. And again, if he was a disaster for Congress, I'm a much bigger fan of what he actually pulled off in this report, I think, than several of the other critics who think he should have gone farther. I totally understand where he was trying to tee the ball up for Congress and then let Congress take out the 3-wood and knock Trump's head as far down the fairway as they possibly could. So
I'm going to go right along and show an example. For something that was considered a witch hunt and a hoax by Trump, there's real indictments here, folks. So here's Flynn, Papadopoulos, Cohen, Manafort. Is that
one thing that really came forward in the report to me is just the cast of characters, and they really are a bunch of criminals, and what they did legally and morally just became apparent. Like, here are a number of things that were wrong, and whether it crossed the lines into being straight up illegal, or if it's just immoral, and at the very least, it's really distasteful. And Mueller, in a very distanced, reserved way, really is pointing out a lot of those things. And I don't think that he did not go into it with an agenda of, I'm going to take these people down, or I'm going to do this or do that. But I think he really does show, he brings out all this evidence of bad behavior, just really bad behavior.
And Henry, one of the reasons we have these indictments are that these guys are lying to him and his investigators. I mean, if you want to be charitable to Trump, I think you could say, I mean, Trump never expected to be president. This was a branding exercise, for God's sake. So he wins. He has no idea what to do. He has no idea who to hire. It's never been an imperative for him. So when Paul Manafort shows up, he's willing to work for free. It doesn't matter to Trump that Paul Manafort is in, $10 million debt to the Russian oligarchs and is going to send them, polling data as soon as he's hired. Trump could care less about that. And I think what, of course, Mueller found out was that when you press Trump, or who, of course, didn't really answer questions except in writing, and only a year after Mueller presented them to him.
right?
But when push came to shove with Roger Stone or Paul Manafort or Papadopoulos or all these guys, they just lied through their teeth. They were a little smarter. They recognized the landmines before they stepped on them. And so they lied about it. And that's why they ended up not with long prison terms necessarily, but that's why they ended up in prison.
Well, some people might think it's just this gang that couldn't shoot straight, but there's more to it than that. They get off. They kind of are given a little too much leniency by it all being thought as leniency in the public's mind by it all being thought as, oh, it was just something that happened, that these guys were in over their head. They didn't really mean anything by it, or
it's a lot of, it becomes clear that it is very deliberate, and there are missteps where they were trying to conspire, especially Trump's children, trying to set up meetings. They were looking to do illegal things, but then through incompetence and through, you know, Manafort or some of the other people, Stone, a little bit of finagling, going, this is illegal, let's protect ourselves. And so there's a little bit of both.
I wanted to jump to the Trump Tower meeting because that figures in book 1 and book 2. It's looking at whether this is a conspiracy, is there some evidence there? And then a year later, the cover-up attempt. And I don't have I wish I had a nice little sample to show folks, but you guys do a wonderful seamless job of taking book 1 and book 2, and within 3 or so pages, you pretty much break down what happened in that Trump Tower meeting. Do you want to speak about that? How you, I'm trying to find like an example that people could get a sense of how you guys worked.
Maybe the Trump Tower meeting is perfect. And Steve looked at this as a problem, saying, here's something that gets mentioned 4 or 5 times. Let's pull this together as one anecdote. And that was one thing that we did, I think that we did well, was trying to organize the book to be a slightly better, easier to understand. What do you think, Steve?
Well, the Trump, Henry, as you know, the Trump Tower meeting looks terrible. I mean, Donald Trump Jr. gets an email basically, and he's told, by the way, from a music promoter, for God's sakes, in London, he's told that, I know some Russians that can give you some dirt on Hillary. You want to have a meeting? And well, again, it's June of 2016. Of course they want to have a meeting. I mean, who wouldn't? So they have this weird meeting in Trump Tower that basically comes to nothing, because when they show up, I mean, Donald Trump Jr. is there, I guess Eric's there, I forget, Reince Priebus, I think, was there. And when they're staring across the table at like 5 Russians who have nothing to offer them, and who then are suddenly talking about Russian adoption for some reason. And they're telling one another through text messages, this is a total waste of time. So who knows? But on the other hand, you can imagine how that looked to Mueller when he sees the email trail from the British music producer, when he sees the things that the Trump campaign has sent back to them. He thinks, oh my God, here is the cornerstone of the case for conspiracy. Turns out not to be that at all. It does turn out, though, to be another opportunity where they could not wait to lie about this. And when the media found out about it a year later and came asking questions, it was just second nature for them not to be honest. I mean, why they weren't honest about what this meeting was, and why they didn't simply say, hey, I guarantee Hillary would have taken the meeting too, but it went nowhere, and here's the proof of it. I don't know, but by that time, I think they were so defensive and so, again, ineffectual at sort of figuring out how to answer any of this stuff, that they panicked and lied about it.
But even so, like the ties of the adoption is, a lot of what the Russians were doing is speaking in code, where the adoption is code for Magnitsky Act, which is code for the millions of dollars that the Russian oligarchs had. So the Russians are saying, hey, we want to free up this money for these rich people. And then they were both sides were wanting something, and neither side was getting it. But it's an amazing meeting, because it is so cinematic, and it's one of those things that in retrospect, it's hard to believe just how bumbling it was, and yet also how significant it was.
Well, it's definitely cinematic. I mean, maybe we won't have the HBO movie next year, but maybe 20 years from now, it is very captivating. And when you think about that adoptions issue, And I don't know, what do you guys think about how many people know what that is referring to? Magnitsky Act equals adoption. I that is absolutely code, and it's not in the. I looked in the Mueller report. He doesn't. I don't know if he said why bother, or if he was wrapped up in bigger things, but there isn't even a note that says when the adoption is referred to. They're only it's the diabolical laughing in amongst themselves. They're talking about the Magnitsky Act.
Well, yeah, he does go. If I remember right, he goes into it a little bit in the footnotes. But a lot of criminals since the 50s have learned to not speak of things directly. Where you have a New Jersey type of like, hey, that. I guess it goes back further. What is that? Who shall rid me of this troublesome priest?
Yeah.
Isn't that? That's the that's the template that people have used for, hey, it's a nice shop you got here. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. So there's nothing indictable in the language, but then the subtext is really significant. And that's a super difficult thing then as a legal, if you're pursuing a legal conviction to say, hey, this subtext is what it's about. It's,
And
Yeah.
Henry, it's also ridiculously difficult to try to plot that in a graphic novel. And on the first draft, we probably had a lot more stuff on some of this stuff. And then Shannon and I would be sitting down at the coffee shop looking at one another like, how do you transfer this to the comic page? It's one thing if you're writing a 428-page book, which Mueller did. It's another thing if you're trying, if you have 400 panels at your disposal, not 400 pages. And some of the details like that, I wish we'd had more time to sort of flesh out.
I will, there's so much to cover. Let me just throw this up here. Now this is showing just a panel from Mueller talking about how social media was exploited, and groups like Black Lives Matter were exploited, which is of course totally relevant for today. It's probably going on as we speak, and it may be in a slightly different way. Would you like to speak to how relevant the Mueller report is and what's going on? The Russian meddling is going on as we speak.
that was one moment in his when he was his testimony where they said, "Is this going to happen again?" And I've never seen Mueller laugh before, but he was shocked and just laughed, and he said, "It's going on right now," and it's dismissed by a lot of the Republicans of saying, oh, whatever, they took out some ads on Facebook. But no, this is real social manipulation, and it is really significant. Steve?
And the one thing though I would add is there's a piece in the latest issue of the New Yorker, September 14th issue. It's called Believe It or Not, and it's talking about Russian disinformation, which of course is ongoing and relentless. But one of the things the author of the piece is asking is, how many minds is Russia actually changing with this disinformation campaign, which was again furious during the election? But how many minds are they changing, and how much are they moving the needle compared to what the president with his tweets and Fox News are doing? It's pretty staggering when you realize how disinformation has become such common currency in the political circus that we're in now. I mean, they're pointing out right after George Floyd died in Minneapolis, there's suddenly a rumor that the Antifa is going to show up in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Who knows how that gets started? It could have been a Russian bot that started it, but suddenly there's 200 people with guns on the streets of Klamath Falls waiting for the Antifa to show up. I don't know what they were expecting, a Subaru with 3 guys with black hoodies. I have no idea. But again, yes, the Russians are unbelievably good at it, but when you have, given the way disinformation is being used by both Trump and his microphones at Fox News, I think what the Russians are doing pales besides what those guys are doing at the moment.
Well, saying Fox News is really triggering for me, but it makes me think of the opposite, MSNBC, which is not exactly the opposite. I shouldn't say that, but I would love to see you guys be on Rachel Maddow, for instance. Can you just imagine getting booked for just a brief time to just talk about your book? I just hope you guys are able to spread the word about this book as much as you can possibly do. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when we made our list, Henry, of places we wanted to do, you were way ahead of Rachel Maddow. I want to say that just in case. But I look, when you mentioned the other graphic novel, I too am glad. I'm glad we brought it out when we did. It's become more relevant, not less relevant. And I'm hoping, yeah, we have some opportunities to talk about it in front of large audiences to sort of connect the dots for them on that.
Well, that's assuming, well, of course, you guys, there's an urgency of getting the word out now, but what are your expectations for the book? Because the book will have a lifespan of decades. I mean, what are some of your dreams for this book, for readers in the future?
We're hoping that the Mueller Report does become something that is a template of saying, hey, here's an investigation. He followed the purview that he was given. He didn't overreach. He amassed a lot of evidence as he was supposed to. He didn't follow through with convictions as he was told not to do. So he did his job, and whether you want to judge him for what that job is or not. But yeah, we looked at it and tried to say this is of historical significance, and hopefully the book that we did is one that gives you a key into something that we think is important.
And Henry, I think we also are hoping that the book ends up in every high school library and every college, honors classroom, so that, again, as your entry point into the Mueller Report, read this first. And then when we need to go deeper into some parts of it, we'll drop that huge volume in your lap, but that it is a accessible entry point into what Mueller was trying to do, and what Trump and some of his campaign staff members did wrong.
Well, it's a great example of what comics do best, is to be a visual storyteller, but take a complex issue and make it readable, concise, accessible. Is there anything that I'm missing that I've tried to do justice to your book as much as I can? Is there something else that you want to bring out about it?
You've been phenomenal. Steve, what do you?
No, I think we've touched it all, Henry. I think, again, what we have tried to do is there's some pretty cool personalities in this sordid political saga. And I think we had the opportunity that Mueller did not, to sort of bring those out, whether it's, Annie Donaldson and her notebook, taking extemporaneous notes on some of these meetings, whether it's, again, there's some pretty, Don McGahn, the White House counsel, who's trying to stop Trump from obstruction every time he turns around. So I do think we bring a little bit of color to some of those personalities, and make them, again, a little bit more, I hate to keep going back to accessible, but that's kind of what it is. They disappear in that 428-page tome, but I think they come to the surface in our book.
Well, for people that are totally unfamiliar with the Mueller Report, it is very readable, because this is a very highly literate, intelligent man, and he makes the book readable. So I don't want that to be lost. Folks, just give it a try. If you start reading, you'll see, wait a minute, I can follow this. This is not so dense that it's beyond me.
Yeah, the first section, I think Steve's talked about this, of the Mueller Report, is more difficult than the second section, a little bit like Old Testament, New Testament. But but it is, yeah, you're right. It is, and we're hoping by giving some visuals to the characters that we are kind of a gateway drug into, you know, you read our book, and then when you're reading the actual Mueller report, that you have these visuals in your head of hey, here are the characters, this is who they are, and you can track them easier, locations a little bit easier. Or even like Jeffrey Toobin's book, and or any of the other books where all of a sudden you've got a right brain and left brain that are working together on understanding this thing.
Okay, well,
Yeah, and Henry, I think one more real quick thing. I mean,
oh, sure.
when Comey is fired, you know, Sarah Sanders gets up in front of the press corps and lies dramatically about it. And in Mueller's report, that's a sentence or two. In our book, it's 4 pages, because we think it's so significant that they're using the White House press secretary to enhance a false narrative. And so no, so again, it's I think you're right. I mean, Mueller lays his case out persuasively and eloquently, and he does it with one hell of a lot of dignity. But I think what we were trying to do is find, you know, again, it was just last week where they dragged Sarah Sanders back to the microphone to say that she never heard Donald Trump disparage, you know, the military as suckers and losers. Well, hopefully, if you have our book at hand, you have a clear example of how often and willing Sarah was, you know, determined to lie for the president. And because that's the kind of thing I think we want you to remember. And that's the kind of thing we elevated in the book.
Okay, well, thank you so much for doing this, guys. And I wish you guys the best with the book. Thank you.